Emerging trends reshaping the business landscape. I'm Parker Lee. I'm the Senior Art Director of Red Caffeine and your host today. I'm taking over for Kathy Steele. And for those unfamiliar, Red Caffeine is a growth consultancy, and we build and execute grow to market plans for ambitious mid market companies. Our service offering includes a fractional team led by senior level marketing leaders that enable a business to scale rapidly without hiring a wide range of full time staff members to move forward a growth plan. Today, we'll discuss getting the most out of a trade show, one of my favorite ways to engage with niche communities. If you've ever considered exhibiting a trade show or attending live events, you know the demand of significant investment time, financial resources, and human capital. With next year's event calendar on the horizon, it's the perfect time to strategize for maximum return on investment. In this session, we're diving deep into making every trade show touchpoint count. We'll guide you through the entire journey from building up your presence and showing up with impact to following up effectively post event. It's all about making each event as successful and rewarding as possible. And we're not alone in this endeavor. We've got live event experts Kevin Fett from Icon Exhibits and Glen Ruggiero from On Location joining us today. They're here to start sharing insights and strategies they've observed in action, helping companies create unforgettable experiences for customers and prospects. Gentlemen, welcome to today's live stream.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the reins as I was dealing with some technical issues. I appreciate it. Sorry about that. Well, as Parker was getting us kicked off, I want to jump in. Obviously, everyone here is expecting to see Kathy Steele, the host of Business as Unusual, the live stream series from Red Caffeine. Unfortunately, Kathy had to be pulled away unexpectedly at the last minute. So I'm jumping in. I'm Bill Skoronsky. I'm the Senior Content Marketing Manager here at Red Caffeine. And we're here to talk, as the screen shows, about getting the best out of 2024 trade shows. And unfortunately, I'm not alone. We've got two fantastic experts in the live event space, Kevin Fett and Glen Ruggiero. And I want to give you both an opportunity to introduce yourselves, perhaps starting with where you're coming at this live event space from, your industry experience. Maybe we can introduce you to the audience in that way. Kevin, why don't you start us off? Why don't you go first?
You bet. And thank you for having me here. As we're talking about business as unusual, it's almost a great segue into what you can expect from trade shows, because you expect the unexpected with Murphy's Law. And we always talk about controlling what you can and maximizing what you can control and minimizing what you can't when we plan for these trade shows. I started in 1991 as in sales for a company called Skyline Displays out of Minneapolis at that time. Became a top global rep there and decided to do it on my own in 2001 and started my own exhibit company, which I sold about 7 years later. I'm with a company called Ion Exhibits. I'm the owner, CEO, and principal here. Bought it back in 2017 and grown that rapidly. My first venture, we were an Inc. 500 company. I remember the 386 label. I was very proud of that. And also made Inc. 5000 again here. I've been always very intrigued with trade shows and live events just because of the excitement of it. We just experienced that here, right? We had technical difficulties before we came aboard here, and people that can't make it last minute. And that's what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So we'll talk about planning and navigating properly through those waters as planning for this 3-day event. In some instances can be the most important thing a company can do as buyers and sellers get together, and how to do it the most efficient way possible. So that's my brief info here.
Thanks very much, Kevin. Glenn, why don't you introduce yourself for a moment too?
Yeah, thank you very much for having us here today. Looking forward to not only having a conversation with everybody, but also hearing the questions from your audience. I started in 2002 in the I&D side of the business of the trade shows, and I worked in the industry for 18 years. Kind of started on the show floor building booths, and then worked into the account manager role, eventually into an account executive role. And then when the pandemic hit, went on to a different venture on the software side. And somebody lured me back in on location. The president and I had known each other for years, and he gave me a call one day and said, "Hey, the industry's back. You coming?" And hard to say no. Once you've been in this, it's in your blood. You kind of live for the chaos that is trade shows. So just came up on my 1 year anniversary of being back here and couldn't be happier. And as Kevin was saying, we live in that gray area of something, all the best laid plans. You have to have that plan B, C, and D. And from the labor standpoint, we work very closely with companies like Kevin's. We partner very closely with them to represent them on the show floor. So a lot of the end users aren't even sure, don't even know we exist. They just walk into the show and there's their big majestic booth that's ready for them to walk in and start selling. So it's pretty exciting. We say we build a city in 3 days. It's kind of crazy. You walk in and see just a huge hall with nothing but concrete, and 3 days later it's a city, and 5 days later it's back to concrete again. So love being in this industry. It's in
Yeah.
your blood. I used to always say that it's not a job, it's not a career, it's a lifestyle doing this. And those of us that have been in it for a long time, we just kind of live and breathe it. So looking forward to having an intriguing conversation today and seeing how we can help share some of the insights that Kevin and I live every day.
Okay. Well, let's start at the logical point is how to plan, how to get ready for an entire calendar of events. A lot of companies don't just do one or two trade shows a year, they'll do several of them. So, as the both of you think about advising companies heading into 2024 with a few events on their radar, uh, talk us through how long it should take to plan and how companies should be getting started thinking about that process.
Yeah, that's a great question. When we talk to companies, we're usually not provided enough time, right? Is somebody says there's a trade show that's coming up, let's say the beginning of June, and not everyone knows how long a process might take because it's not their industry. And so what we do is we back out all the specific time to effectively plan for. So if you back out, let's say a show that's starting in beginning of June, you have to back up a specific amount of time for installation to take place, which is Glen's world, and then you have to back out time for the advanced warehouse date or a date that needs to be there. So you're backing out that time. Then you're backing out time for it to be shipped. And then you're backing out time for it to be staged and prepped at the exhibit house. And then you're backing out time for production and graphics. And then you're backing out time for engineering and design and graphic design and initial stages of planning. So it all depends on the type of booth that you're going to, whether it's a small show or a large show. I would say with your small shows, your inline shows, you probably want to give your exhibit house a minimum of 4 months, 5 to 6 months out from a show date is going to give them enough time to plan and execute a successful show for you. Some of the larger booth spaces, even 8 to 12 months out, which is crazy to think about, right? You just got done with the show. Why would you start planning for a show? But in some instances, when you're talking about very large shows where it only happens 2 or 3 years, every 2 or 3 years, people do start those plans at 12 months before the show because they're big spaces. There's a lot of people involved, and the more people involved, the slower things move. But that's typically, your 4 to 5 months for smaller booths, up to 8+ months out for larger exhibit spaces.
Okay. Glenn, is that the same experience you've had?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that there's a trickle down effect, and labor and trucking are usually the ones at the very end of the line. And so if things get delayed on the exhibit house side, they can't get the graphics from the client or can't get final sign off, and that starts pushing things out. Ideally, you want to be able to send your shipment into the advanced warehouse, because that means the freight will be sitting on the show floor whenever your target move-in time is. So that means that when you schedule labor, we can show up at 8 o'clock in the morning because we know the freight's going to be there. If you miss that target time, now you got to ship directly to show. That creates a whole host of issues because now the truck drivers have to check in. You don't know when they're going to be in line, when they're going to get called up, when they're going to get unloaded. So that could lead to delays on the show floor, which eventually leads to a higher labor bill, because if we have guys there at 8 o'clock and the freight doesn't show up till 2 o'clock in the afternoon, unfortunately, a lot of times we have to keep those guys on the clock. So that pre-planning that Kevin was talking about, the longer window you can give makes it basically saves you money in the long run. The other thing is on big shows, we have CES coming up in January, massive show in Vegas. The longer you wait to put in your labor order, the longer, or the chances are that labor is going to go work elsewhere. So we want to go ahead and lock in the highest quality labor as far in advance as possible, which is going to give you your best crews for setting up your booth.
We have we have a lot of conversations around what the company can control going into the environment. But what you just brought up is, I think, a factor that a lot of companies don't consider regarding various union regulations and what local issues companies may run into that they never considered. What can you speak to regarding that?
Well, the labor jurisdictions across the country vary. You can have a city like Boston where the labor team lays all the electrical cables on the floor and then runs it to all the TVs and everything else above the carpet, to show a place like Chicago where all the electricians do everything having to do with electric. So that plays into when you're doing your budgeting, knowing whether that money is going to be going in one direction or the other. So it's important to have communication with the labor teams to know what is on their plate in every location. We have clients say sometimes, why did it take longer to build a booth in Atlanta than it did in Chicago? Well, in Atlanta, we do all the electric, including fire management. In Orlando, we can build the hanging signs. So your labor is going to vary, but also your electric bill is going to vary. So partnering with your exhibit house and having those conversations and making sure that they're on the same page, and then us having that conversation with the exhibit house as well, can help lead to the best efficiency in your projects.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, Glenn. Really lean on your partner, right? And usually the first point of contact is your exhibit house. Knowing that they're partnering with companies like Glenn's and on location. Every venue has different rules and regulations, right? There's specific rules that Freeman or a GES would lay out, but also the association works hand in hand to making different rules and regs as well. So in one avenue, you could hang a structure. Another avenue, you might not be able to. One avenue, you could plug in something. Another one, you can't. And those are all dictated on booth design, where you're shipping the exhibit to, whether it's advanced or direct to show. There's a lot of different variables behind the scenes. And those that have that tribal knowledge and work together can help have a more successful outcome at these particular venues. You might have one exhibit that's identical going from one event to the next, like Glenn said, and you might have a whole different set of rules. And it's what keeps us on our toes, to be said. I mean, things like that just played into different association rules is we have RSNA coming up here in Chicago, which is a very big medical show. And they just made a rule that every exhibit structurally needs engineering stamps by a local engineer here to be approved before it gets set. And this is something that's entirely new and sent shockwaves to the industry. And so that's when around finding our engineers, we know the exhibits are structurally sound, but if you show up with something without a stamp, you might say you can't build your booth. So things are everly changing. Expect the unexpected.
The other interesting thing about different locations, if you have somebody that maybe they just have a pop-up, so they bought their pop-up from Kevin's company, and they're going to want to bring that into the show themselves. there's different regulations as to whether you can carry something onto the show floor, or if it can be on wheels, or if it can be on a dolly or a hand truck. So you may be stopped in one location and say, no, you've got to go through what's called drayage through the back docks and have it delivered to your booth. Or in another location, you might be able to carry that on, and that could create a lot of more expense and headache, not knowing that going in. So even if you may not have an exhibit house that's working day to day with you, you still want to pick the reins and find out what, when you buy that, are there any restrictions, knowing my show schedule, that I need to keep in mind.
I would imagine every company also has its own set of goals, its own way of measuring success for an event. In your experience, what do you see as the best approach to coming out of the experience feeling like you really got something accomplished at a trade show?
That's a very good question. I could start with that. We tend to lead into our discovery processes. We bring our designers in, and one of the things that we first ask is, all right, imagine yourself coming back from this show, a couple weeks after the show, and then you're all at your executive table, and you're asking yourselves, all right, why was this show successful for us? Okay. So thinking in the future, you're thinking about, now what are all the different things that mean success to us? Because it means success to different companies, right? Some companies just want lead generation. Some other companies aren't worried about that. They're worried about just their brand. Other companies want to set goals and look at the competition. Others are networking. They're enhancing their current relationships. So you really have to define that prior to going in. And when you're working with your exhibit house on how and laying it out, is it more hospitality? Is it more meeting spaces? Is it more one-on-one demos? Is it more qualified lead stations? So, imagine yourself after that show asking why is this show successful? And that'll help you in the preparations and the planning of the show.
Mm-hmm. Glenn?
From our standpoint, usually a successful show is we came in on budget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that would mean a lot to the company as well, that they didn't go into it expecting one thing and see their budget blow up over time. So that's certainly meeting expectations. From more of a technology standpoint, we were talking before the show kicked off about all the ways in which a venue can be a technological masterpiece, or it can be extremely outdated. So I'd like to ask each of you about your experience with technology integration and innovation, using those to create the best trade show experience possible.
Yeah, in our instance, technology has come a long way. Back decades ago, when somebody had a 42-inch plasma, it stopped people in their track, right? Created movement in their space. Nowadays, if you have a flat screen, people don't even notice it, right? So looking at what's recently taken across the board, that Glenn has been installing more and more video screens, utilizing something that's bigger to capture that attention, to stop people in their tracks. They work. They are an audience magnet, and they've become very more affordable, and most of the people rent this technology through exhibit houses or AV houses. So looking at all the different manufacturers that have video walls, other things can be smart screens, touch screens, where you're having more interactive demonstrations and capturing those attendees' information as they're utilizing this activity. Generally can be done even without a member there. When you're talking about exhibitors that might have large products, but they want to show how things are happening in them. Imagine a big vat or machinery, and they want to see what's on it. You can project things onto it, animating what's going on in there. There's so many cool things out there that are available that you might not know of it. Just ask what you're wanting that end result to be, right? And if you want that wow factor, it's out there.
Yeah, we actually have an industry trade show called Exhibitor Live that goes on every year, and that's where a lot of exhibit houses and exhibitors will walk the show floor. And there's exhibit houses, I&D companies, AV companies, you name it. And it's where you get all the great new ideas of what's out there. It's kind of there's a precursor to that called Euroshop that happens out in Europe, and that's an even bigger show where a lot of the new ideas, the new technology that's coming out, new structures, and all that people get a chance to see. From the technology standpoint, from my chair, it's changed a lot. When I first started building booths on the show floor, that's what we did. You built mostly hardwood booths, or there were pop-ups, and then the metal frames came out, became a lot more popular, lightweight, less in shipping costs, easier to set up. Now it's beyond just building a booth. Our guys on the floor, they need to know. Going back to Kevin's plasma example, the next one after that was to plug a thumb drive in there to have something looping. Well, the
Yeah.
thumb drive USB technology back then was tough. You could buy two of the exact same TVs, and a thumb drive would work in one and not the other. So the labor team had to try and troubleshoot those issues. Now you're getting into all the LEDs, and our guys are having to carry solder guns now because in shipping with the rattling, the connections for the LED get broken. So they've got to solder. So it's not anymore just building the booth. They've got to know how to solder and run, troubleshooting for the lights and a lot of other kind of technology stuff. And then you've got the video walls, which are huge. Like Kevin said, that's giving you that really wow factor now. But even before that, a little simpler technology are light boxes. And this changes, the dynamics on the show floor because it gives you a really big wow factor. You can change out your graphics to for each show, so you still have that same light box effect. But for us, in some cases, we can't build that light box because it has an electrical component to it. In other places, we can build the whole thing and just have electricians plug it in. So as new technology comes out, I remember the unions. There was a argument between two different unions on the video walls when they first came out because the electricians said it was their jurisdiction, but the stagehands said that it was theirs. And they ended up defining it that if it's a single image on a TV, it's the electricians, but if it's considered a moving image, it goes from one TV to another or multiples, it's considered a moving image, which falls under the stagehands jurisdictions. So that's some of the fun stuff that Kevin and I have to work around. Exhibitors don't know anything about it. They just say, "Hey, I want that," and we make it happen. But it's just stuff on the back end that's changed in our industry.
And all this is to get people to engage with the booth, correct?
Mm-hmm. To stand out from your competition.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the booth, if we're starting to talk to booth design, it is extremely important. The design, the layout, the orientation, the traffic flow. Make sure when you work with an exhibit house, make sure they bring in an exhibit designer, to the call, right? If you're just talking exhibit design and it's just a sales rep, I'm in sales. I think salespeople are great, but bring in that tech expert, bring in that designer, so you can have some great Q&A with that person, and they can understand what you're trying to do. First knowledge. When you're talking small booth space, typically, inline exhibits, we say 10 by 10, 10 by 20 type of thing. It's keeping your message simple. The KISS approach: keep it simple, stupid. It works really well. When you're thinking the approach of a design, think billboard and less bulletin board, right? Less said in a trade show booth is more read. Okay. Me as an audience member, if I would remember just three things, I want to know who you are. I want to know what you do. And most importantly, I want to know what you're going to do for me. Right. So that's your logo, your tagline, and maybe just a few bullet points of maybe quantifiable data why working with you or buying your product or your service enhances me, because an audience really doesn't want to listen to you and all of your greatness. They want to know what you're going to do for them. So keep it simple, stupid, who you are, what you do, and what are you going to do for me. And when you look into the larger booths that really Glenn gets involved with, those are more creative atmospheres. We're looking at flow. And our approach here at Ion is looking at a 3-tiered one cake. If you can go up 16 feet, go up 16 feet. You're fighting for airspace and you've paid for it. So if you only go up 8 feet, you're losing all of that branding message to get out to the hall, right? And so that top tier should be your logo, who you are. That middle point, that 8 to 12 feet, that midsection is what most exhibitors miss, and that's a way to tell people what you do, categorize divisions. There's a lot of great branding within that middle section. And then that lower section is, what are you going to do for me? Again, more quantifiable graphics, data, statistics. This is where your demo stations can be for demonstrations, your meeting areas, your product. And all of that is integrated. So we take that approach. And when you put up a brand, right, make sure it has 360 identification in your hall. The most important places for logo placement within the hall are towards the entrance and towards the middle of the show hall, right? Because that's where all the action happens. Most people turn right when they enter the show hall, statistically. Most people are right-handed and they turn right, and then they start going back and forth with the aisles, and then we identify that main point aisle where you have a greeting station. We call it a qualification station, and that's a great point where people can say what brings you to the show, and if it's a qualified lead, you can bring them to a tech expert. So that's the intro, the welcome, and we generally do that on the larger aisles. But we give it a lot of thought, right, with your branding and locations, whether it's small or large, and work with your exhibit house and ask the questions and get the designer involved.
Yeah, to Kevin's point on the that going up into that airspace, I'm involved in something called the Future Workforce with the EDPA, which is our association representative, and we did a show at the American School Counselors Association because we want to try and get our industry into the schools, so people that are not sure what they want to do after high school, they don't have to go to college. That there's a ton of jobs in the trade show industry that they can go to right out of high school. So the booth that was put together, it wasn't necessarily, nobody knew who we were, but it was the tagline that was up there that had people coming into our booth. It said the largest industry that nobody knows about. And people are walking in going, well, I'm curious, what is the largest industry that nobody knows about? It's the trade shows. And so that was creating that drive for them to come over and engage with us. On the flip side, we exhibit at the Exhibitor Live show, and find that whatever your booth giveaways are is a way to draw people in. So when I was in my past life, we had these tumblers, and they were really sharp looking. People would walk up and say, hey, can I have one? And the engagement was, sure, you can have one, but you have to give me 2 minutes of your time to have a conversation. And every time, 15, 20 minutes later, they're walking away with a tumbler, but it was something that we made sure was engaging enough that we could get them to the booth and then keep them there as long as we could to have the conversation we need to have. So there's a lot of things to think about. I think that one of the largest problems that people have when they go to trade shows, they don't engage with people. They are sitting there on their phones or on their laptops, or they're interacting with one another. So people are walking by. That's the cue that they're interested. Something in that booth caught their eye. Now it's up to the people that are working that booth to engage them and draw them inside the booth to go through all the next steps that Kevin just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Is it quickly identifying what that person's intent is, the grocery shopper who goes up and down every aisle versus somebody who's very intentionally looking for a conversation? Is that quick moment where you can spend most of your time identifying the right people to talk to as opposed to just sitting back and waiting for someone to come to you?
Yeah, I mean, most people have a list of the exhibitors they want to go visit, right? It's their targeted list on getting together, and then you got the stroming people, right? And they may or may not be qualified. So your time is important. You paid a lot for the real estate, and making sure you have the right people asking the right questions, right? With trade shows, like in selling, it's always asking the question and getting the audience to talk more, right? Because in our day and age, most people have done the research, right? Of people are visiting, they know what you're doing. but asking the qualified question, what brings you to the show today? That does it right there, right? It's an open-ended question, and they need to tell you why they're there, and then you can quickly realize whether we want to engage in them. And if they do become a qualified person, most people want to talk to your tech expert. Bring me to the specialist so we can talk shop, right? I got things to do. I'm probably visiting you for a short amount of time. Make the most of it.
Hmm. And when you think about the average company, how often are they rebuilding or reconfiguring their booth on an average basis?
That's a great question. Today's booths are more scalable and modular than they ever have been, right? They're all component based. In years past, when you wanted to have that custom structure, Glenn had talked about it's made out of a carpentry shop. It's made out of wood, and then you're going to see that same booth for 7 years because that's your capital asset, right? Every 7 years you can write it off, and then you get a new one. More and more people are going the flexible route, knowing they can change spaces, they can go to a show, they can get out of a show, so they rent. Most of our business, 60-70% of our business is renting exhibits. So, if you work with the exhibit houses that have that inventory of what's new and new in the industry, framing systems that we cover with graphics and light boxes and technologies, that keeps the cost in check. Rental is typically a third of the purchase price. When you talk to your finance people, you can still write it off. A rental is a write-off. And then you can change it out show to show. Next year, you could have a different layout, right? Another thing that's great about the economies of scale of rental is if you rent something, reuse the graphics if it's once a year show. Reuse the graphics twice or 3 times. People aren't going to remember it. So you have the investment of the graphics, and now you just have to rent the structure. And it becomes that second and third show becomes very cost affordable, right? So that's what we're seeing in the industry is people going towards custom rentals and not having to have such a big investment that you have to look at every year, and it gives you the flexibility.
Sure. Glenn, is that about what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, the reconfiguration. So there's the ability to go from a 10 by 10 if you're going to be going to a small show up to as big as you want. So to Kevin's point, a lot of folks will see that they've got program accounts and they may be going to 50 shows a year, and they can just go ahead and look at what is their goal for each one of these shows, and then just get a booth that is going to accommodate that goal for each and every show.
Talking about budgets, it's obviously difficult to say this is what you should expect to spend, but can you talk about how to maximize what you can get out of a show, either by what we say building up to a show in advance or following up from the show afterwards? What have you seen work best in terms of maximizing more than that 3 days, but the entire, say, 3 months around a trade show?
A great question. I mean, I'll say most of the time people come with us and the budget's not enough, right? So you have to know what the budget is, and we ask where the budget come from. And if somebody says that, we did this show years ago and that's what the budget was, well, post-pandemic, things have increased by at least 20% with across the board on things. And so sometimes that's shocking. But when you look at the categorization of budgets, there's really 3 separate budgets of trade shows, and not everyone gets the budget that's comprehensive of things, right? So you have a budget for the exhibit stuff, right? So it's exhibits and rentals and graphics and design. Those are the tangibles that you can hold, right? You got furniture, you got technology, you got flooring. All those things can be rented at the booth. And then we always ask people, well, does that include your services? And they ask, well, what is that? So that's install and dismantle. That's shipping back and forth. That's become more expensive to the venue, right? So you have show service costs, and then you got things that are. Then the third thing are venue services, And those are things like electricity, material handling, which Glenn said it was rigging, and you got vacuuming, and you got cleaning, you got hospitality, you got the floor space. So it's really 3 segments, and you want to be able to make sure you're upfront with your exhibit house and what those segments are, so they know what is on their end to play with, right? It's always sometimes can be a big shocking mystery saying, oh, I didn't know you wanted to include services with that. And now you have to start cutting things out of the design. So making sure that you're communicating right with the executive team or the people that are providing the budgets, right? Most houses can tell you kind of a range, right? Along with Glenn, I'm also part of the EDPA. I'm chapter president here in Chicago and been on the board forever. There are ranges of what you can expect, right? If you're renting something, if you're buying something, so you can have that range, which is the industry average. And any exhibit house should tell you that. You don't have to say my budget's this. You can ask them, well, what's the range that I can expect? And then you can say if you want to be in the lower or the higher end of that. And that's what I have for that, Glenn.
I'd say that there's a big change in our industry over the years. And back in the early 2000s, when I'd started, there were a lot of exhibit managers that were a part of companies. And after 9/11, and then after the 2008 crisis, those jobs started going away, and they started just putting it as another job responsibility on somebody in the office. The administrative assistant now is scheduling all the trade shows. With the change in jobs that had happened after the pandemic, we're seeing it all over the place with exhibit houses for our interaction with them, with their account managers. Exhibit houses are seeing it with the contacts that they were dealing with at the companies, that there's so many people that don't know all the details that go behind what happens with the trade show. And Kevin brought up a great point about all these fees. So they say, hey, I've got a $250,000 budget. And they go to Kevin and have him put together this beautiful design for $250,000. And then they go, oh, that includes labor? Or it doesn't? Oh, I have to pay for labor? So I think that there's a huge educational process that's having to go on here of teaching people that just got thrown the job of, oh, by the way, you're doing trade shows today. To find out and partner. Again, the vendor relationship doesn't work in trade shows. It's got to be a partnership. And with that, there's a lot of training and education and looking out for the best interest of each other. The exhibit houses are phenomenal at guiding the exhibitors through the process, but the exhibitors also have to be open to hearing that information, asking the questions, being transparent. They like to hold a lot of stuff close to the vest, and they've got to be able to share that information more with the exhibit house. Then they can share that with the trucking, the I&D. They can handle the services. A lot of Kevin's company at Ion, they do full service. So the exhibitor can literally say to the exhibit house, handle everything. I'll just answer all the questions you ask me. And then they just show up at the opening of the show and do their thing, which is the best, because you let the professionals guide you through the process.
What about attendance at trade shows? Following the pandemic, have we gotten back to really strong attendance across the board?
Yeah, it's back.
Okay.
It's funny because the attendance goes up and down depending on whatever crisis we're going through, 9/11, 2008, and the pandemic. And you always hear the same thing. There was less people attending the show, but there were more decision makers there. And so you're starting to, we saw that coming out of the pandemic, but now you're starting to see more and more people on the floor. You're seeing attendance records being broken. We're the kind of people that we like to be face to face. And so people are wanting to get out there and get back on the trade show floor. I think the best thing that came out of the pandemic is that it shut down everybody that said trade shows are going to die because, for as long as I've been doing this, there was something that was going to get rid of trade shows, and the virtual just doesn't cut it. We're people, and so people are wanting to get out there, shake hands, touch things, see things with their own eyes. And yeah, so right now, from what we're seeing, everything's leading to more and more attendance, records getting broken.
Kevin, are
Yeah,
you
I agree.
echoing that?
Yeah, attendance roared back, and we're seeing really big numbers here. Attendances are up. We went through a period of safeguarding, making sure everyone was safe. The associations, when we came back, was all about safety, right? And now it's really business as usual at trade shows, and they're growing again, building more entertainment districts around venues. Venues are ramping up their strategies for gaining associations to come to their events here, and building hotel rooms, etc. So yeah, we're actually looking to a really significant 2024. Trade shows are a little cyclical with the even years for some reason. A lot of bigger events that happen every 2 years or such happen on even years. So it's going to be a crazy 2024, I'll tell you that. So pre-planning is significantly important for providing people with enough time to execute them.
We talked about that pre-show, the way that venues are starting to differentiate by building an entire community around themselves, whether it's restaurants or hotels or meeting space. But can we distill down for the companies who really want to stand out themselves? What would you say are the top 3 takeaways for the best strategy for standing out among a crowded space at a trade show?
Yeah, I mean, not every show is going to be the largest market share or the biggest company, right? Most companies that go to shows are small companies, mid-sized companies, and stick to what you do best, right? Market what you do best. Don't try to be everything, right? People aren't going to remember that. Stick to your bread and butter. Be hyper focused on what that messaging is to create that memorable experience. When you have smaller booth spaces, what I've noticed this past year is, competing with people that have larger spaces, send out, provide invitations to the qualified people and rent out the hospitality room right at the convention hall. I think the ROI on that is rocket high, right? I mean, having some drinks for happy hour afterwards, and getting to know, the people you're meeting and your client base there on your show booth, and opportunity to hang out with them a little longer is great. I think it does wonders. Even having a small booth or if you have a larger booth, have a portion of that be a theme to where you're at. Right, if you go to New Orleans, maybe serve beignets or something. If you're going to Orlando, have something that is a little more theme based to it. It's more memorable, right? It's more fun. But having a side hospitality suite, I think, is a very cost effective thing to enhance all those relationships and have it continue.
I think Kevin touched on it earlier about most people are showing up on the show floor with a walking list. So everything that he talked about of trying to catch their eye of, hey, look at me, you may not have, I may not be on your list is great. But, going before that, too many people focus only on the trade show itself, but there's all that pre-show marketing that you need to do. Get that message out there so that you end up on that walking list of those people. And then even more importantly is making sure you follow up. Most of the leads just die after the show. People leave the show floor. There's all different ways of capturing that lead information, and you just got to have some sort of system in place to make sure that you're following up and making that show worth it. Otherwise, it really is just a party that you go to every year.
Correct. I mean, it's still. I feel so strongly about trade shows and why companies participate, and again, people have different reasons why they're going, but the common theme is to make money, right? And so, asking those qualified leads, but making sure, going to a show is certainly not cheap. It's an investment. make sure that you have a plan. Make sure that those sales reps are following up on those leads, right? Have that action plan, um, because there's so many that don't, and it's painful to hear, and qualify it, right? My wife worked at Nielsen for many years. It was part of trade shows, and she came up with a plan of making sure that things were followed up on, right? There was an action plan. You had a short-term plan, you had a long-term plan, and the short-term plan was to make sure they scheduled appointments, they scheduled brochures to go out, etc. Long-term plan is to make sure you're still capturing that ROI, right? To bring back to those executives. If you have that one sale from the short term, what's that annuity mean from that long-term client that you met at a trade show, and what that means to your business? And a lot of companies don't capture that. They might capture just a one-term sale, but what does that mean on the long-term cycle, right, of what that meant? And that's a huge impact for better budgets, going to more shows, right? All the things that can be really a Kickstarter. Your own Kickstarter campaign is on the trade show floor. Another one that trade show managers should look at, there's a resource called Trade Show Calendar. I think, Glenn, is that what it is? Trade Show Calendar. And a lot of exhibit houses have that resource on their websites. But go to that, tradeshowcalendar.com. You can look it up by industry, by venue, by location, and kind of map out what shows are happening. There's 10,000 trade shows here in North America alone, both horizontal and vertical trade shows. And, there might be shows that we weren't even aware of, right? That you could participate in to start walking initially, and then see if that's worthwhile to exhibit at. But that could be a great resource for those that don't know it.
I really like what you said about following up. In my experience at trade shows, one of the saddest things that I've seen is sales reps being reluctant to give out their business card because they're somewhat ashamed of their website, or they don't want to drive a really good lead to a really bad piece of marketing. So it's almost like taking the brand story out of it and saying, here's my website, but don't go there. I just give me a call. We can talk one-on-one about this. So it's almost like the catalyst for making sure that all of your other marketing is supporting your investment in going to this event and getting so many eyeballs on your company. Because the worst thing to happen would be you make a great first impression, and then that falls off the table over the next couple of weeks. Either you don't follow up, or what they find beyond what they experience at the trade show is just not connected. It's just not consistent. That's one of the hardest things for me to see. It's that they're just not supported out there in the trade show experience. But I'm sure there are other questions that either people should be asking themselves going into this planning period, or questions that when they ask you, bells go off in your head that this company is really thinking about it the right way. So if we could wrap up just these last couple of minutes on key takeaways to leave people with, either questions they should be asking, people they should be involving in the conversation, or like you just mentioned, resources to go to make this an intentional part of your 2024 strategy. I'd love to hear some closing comments from each of you.
Yeah, when I look into 2024, I would say when you're doing planning, give yourself and the company that you're working with enough time, right? Generally, when we get calls from people that want to go to a show, we're already behind the eight ball, right? It's 2 months to the show or 3 months to the show, and generally they don't know all the things that are involved behind the scenes of putting together a show. So I would start planning, plan 4 or 5 months out for the smaller projects, 8 to 10 months out for the larger projects, right? Make sure that you have that knows what your budget is and what that budget is allocated towards, right? With those 3 different pools, whether, this is for the exhibit portion, this is for the services portion, this is for the venue portion, right? And be clear about that with the people that you're working with up front, right? And then go with the purpose, right? Go with what you're good at. Be hyper focused on your marketing message. try not to be everything to everyone, because being a member of experienced people, it's so much noise there. People are not going to remember all of that. So be hyper focused on what your pitch is and be clear about what your pitch is. Get together with your staff, have a plan, know what you're pitching, right? Know what you're asking, and then have that follow up. That I will say most companies don't do, or do it very poorly. And if you do that very well, you're going to have a successful event moving forward too.
I'd also like to add in that when an exhibit house gives deadlines, they're for a reason, and there's a pressure that goes into the system. The more you get closer to the past the deadlines and towards the show, and that has a snowball effect. So from what we hear, and our cities will get FedEx shipments all the time of graphics. It's the one of the last things that people will finalize. And that puts stress into the system from the exhibit house side, from the labor team side. It's also increased costs. Look at the FedEx bills around a trade show program, and the closer you get to the event, the more things that can go wrong, and the less time you have to react on it. And as I said, it's a snowball effect. So if Kevin's company is not getting the information about what you're going to do, they can't pass that on to the labor or the shipping or the printing companies. And now everything is just getting tighter and tighter. And people are in this mindset of the Amazon mentality of I should be able to click a button and I can have it delivered today. Why can't I just click a button and have a labor guy pop up, or have my graphics printed today and show up tomorrow? And it's much different in our world. So I would say the biggest impact that you can have at the end is just follow the restrictions that are the timing that your exhibit house lays out for you. Be communicative, be transparent with them, and think of them as a partner, because we're partnering with them and all the other verticals that work to make a successful show, and it'll reduce the amount of stress that is part of trade shows.
Well, everything you've both said leads back to the topic of the title, even just thinking strategically about how to plan for getting most out of your trade shows. So I appreciate you wrapping up with that. It really speaks to the amount of work you put in at the beginning typically has direct result on how much you get out of it at the end. So I'm really glad that we had this time to talk. Glenn, Kevin, I want to thank you both for making the time and for bearing with us on our technical issues as we move through this. I want to thank everybody for attending today's live stream as well. The recording will be available afterwards, of course, but as we start to turn the page towards next month's Business as Unusual, the last events of the year, I want to make sure that we leave our sponsors on the screen for a second as well. And Insperity, M3 Learning, and HR Source have been fantastic partners to work with all year. We look forward to continuing to build those relationships, because these are core areas that we deliver services in as well. And I encourage you to reach out to Kevin or Glenn if you have additional questions about the trade show space itself. But let's look ahead to next month's BAU just for a moment. I'd encourage you to think about the middle of the month here. December 14th is our next event. And specifically, if you're in a situation where you're considering how to pass on the leadership baton within your own company, whether that's a family-owned company or otherwise, there are a lot of factors that our guest, Ed Barone from Evergreen Wealth Solutions, can help you think through. He'll be here next month. Kathy Steele will be back, of course, and they'll be talking about succession planning. They'll be talking about both emotional and financial readiness, understanding the importance of being prepared to transition your business to the next generation, so to speak. And then finally, creating a transferable business. There are a lot of key strategies that Ed will walk you through, and I think he has a 6-step process that will be very helpful for people in that situation, certainly here at the end of the year. And then we have an entire slate of Business as Unusual topics coming up in 2024. I'm sure we'll be talking about live events once again, as it's such a big focus of, as both of our guests today mentioned, is coming back in full force. The amount of trade show traffic and the opportunity is certainly never been higher. And I think as people are craving that in-person experience, as we're all working remotely and we want to see each other in person again, I don't expect that to change anytime soon. So once again, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Kevin, for your time and for your insights. I think we all got a little bit smarter today. So I'll leave it here and encourage you to reach out to any of the three of us if you have questions that we can help answer. But for now, this has been Business as Unusual, live stream from Red Caffeine, and we'll see you next month. Take care, everyone.
Thank you much, everyone.